how will the relationship be defined now between the U.S. Israel on one side, or political West, and Iran on the other? Because it seems, as you suggested, we can't go back to do a things war. You referenced the IAEA, and I saw that recently. The director of the IAEA, Rossi, he was asking, where has Iran stored its enriched uranium, and this will be like giving targeting data to the Israelis and Americans, just where they should bomb next. So it kind of shows the vulnerability, though. In any arms control, you need transparency, but if that transparency is used to, yeah, if that's targeting data, then it's, of course, it's very dangerous. So in terms of arms controls, the non-proliferation treaty, the role of the IAEA, but also, as you said, now the deterrent of Israel, or the illusion of this Iron Dome, has been shattered a bit. Iran has strengthened its position. It seems to have come out of this. I'm not saying that Iran didn't suffer a lot of heavy blows and casualties, but it come out of this in some ways strengthened as well. So what does this mean for the relationship? Also, you said, given that the Americans claim that the nuclear facilities have been completely destroyed, they don't have any reasons to attack anymore. But it also seems that there's no reason to negotiate anymore. Why negotiate with the nuclear program if there is no nuclear program now? If it's all been destroyed. So, well, what does this all mean? I know that's a awfully wide question. So, but how do you see the weeks and months, if not years, going forward? How will this relationship be different than what it was in the past? Obviously, it's not going to be a very friendly relationship, but how do you see this?
Well, the West will always find an excuse. They'll say terrorism. They'll say there's an imminent threat. Maybe a false flag operation. I think that's something that we should be always thinking about. Somewhere something will happen, and then they'll blame Iran, and then they'll carry out another strike or something like that. Human rights. The West will always they can find something, and the Western media will run with it. It doesn't matter. It's the Washington Post or if it's Fox News. They're all the same when it comes to this sort of thing. They get into fights over uh, a number of genders, they have, or whether men fight can fight boxing matches with the women in the ring or something like that. But when it comes to killing people and carrying out mass slaughter outside of the civilized war, they'll find a way to justify it. But I think another important thing that's happened, and something that I think I briefly alluded to, is how the rest of the world is looking upon this. You saw, for example, the Russian statement on the IAEA saying that Iran's right. If you're basically spying on Iran, giving intelligence, why should Iran cooperate with you? This is new. This is important. And I think you're going to see Russia, China, and others tilt further away from the West and closer, and we're already seeing them moving closer to Iran. Because they see this as a threat to themselves. Everyone sees this. The United States that it has gone rogue. Increasingly, it's always been a rogue regime. I think Chomsky called it that many decades ago. But it's gone far further than ever before, and I think that very much works to Iran's advantage. This speeds up the process of a multipolar world. And I think after this war, the fact that Iran came out bruised but victorious, badly bruised. I mean, but it's very impressive, Glenn. Very impressive. It was very painful, but it's also very impressive to see so many senior commanders in the military slaughtered with their families and their grandchildren and their neighbors during the first few hours in this unprovoked and illegal war, in this blitzkrieg. Yet they were able to regroup so rapidly, and it shows the depth of Iran, and it shows how the Islamic Republic of Iran and the political establishment, how powerful it is and how deeply attached it is to broader society, whether they like it in the West or not, whether they acknowledge it or not. If this had happened to almost any other country, I would say it would have collapsed. But in Iran, there was no fear that there would be collapse. Not for a moment did anyone I know think that we're going to fall apart. They they said, "Well, we're going to fight back." And the leader, his two interventions in public were very powerful, very confident. During the first few hours, they'll be defeated. And Iranians, they were very worried about, because you're being bombed, and uh, the Western media is, uh, and the Persian language media, promoted by, the Persian language media in the West, in London and elsewhere, these are just agents of empire. They were constantly carrying out psychological warfare against the Iranian people. They're true enemies of Iranians. And, but despite all that, they did create concern and worry among some, but they became despised in a way in which I haven't seen. I have never seen how them being so universally hated, their hosts and hostesses and their guests and so on. I've never seen that before. It's such hatred for them among people who would watch them before. So, but I didn't meet anyone who thought, "Oh no, Iran is about to fall." Not for a moment, not a single person. And that shows the strength of Iran. And it also shows that some people should start thinking about, what is it about Iran? What is it about, right now it's the day before the month of Muharram. From tomorrow will be the first day of Muharram. And it's a 10-day period of mourning, sort of, which culminates in Tasu'a and Ashura. Ashura is the day when the grandson of the Prophet was martyred in Karbala. And he said no to the despot of his time, and he went and he said no to humiliation, and he fought for the disenfranchised and the oppressed and the marginalized. And his sister, who was then taken captive, she was outspoken and fearless, and so this sister and brother, Zainab and Imam Hussein, they are very, very, very much a part of Iranian culture and also part of Iranian political culture. So if anyone has ever visited Iran during Ashura, which is in 10 days, they would understand uh, how deeply embedded this is in Iranian culture, and and of course in Lebanon too, and elsewhere. So this is something that the West does not understand. That even the most secular of Iranians, when it's Ashura, they they're different. Ashura is something very special in Iran, and so I think that is a key part of Iran's resilience, a key part of Iran's resilience, and it's the fact that it can be steadfast in this way. But it's something that the West cannot comprehend because they don't comprehend anything. They assume that going they are they're exceptional. They assume that uh, that they are destined to be victorious, and everyone else is just inferior and incapable and incompetent and regimes, as they say. But and I think that is going to be their undoing, and it has been. That's how they also underestimated Russia, they underestimate China, they underestimate everyone, because everything except for themselves is abnormal. And what is abnormal will collapse. They don't seem to recognize that perhaps the most abnormal of all is actually the Western political establishment.
Yeah, this is yeah, been one actually the leading concern of mine as as a Westerner. I see the governments become deeply irrational because rationality in political realism entails acting in accordance with the international distribution of power, And when you say the world is shifting to multipolarity, I think this is the source of the irrationality now of the West, because traditionally in security, you want to the key point of departure is always the security competition. That is, states compete for security. You have security dilemmas, and this is what security has usually been about. How do you recognize security concerns of your opponents, pursue, ideally positive some ways of reducing security competition. So in other words, if you take into account Iranians' legitimate security concerns, then you can reduce those fears. Then Iran would act in a way which would reduce ours, and then you seek, positive sum solutions. But something strange happened 30 years ago, which was the unipolar moment. That is, security through hegemony. Now this whole theme of taking into account the security concerns of others was thrown out the window, because you don't have to mitigate security competition if security depends on one center of power being all dominant. So it doesn't matter what other countries think. Russia, China, Iran, doesn't matter. And the problem now is, as we recognize the reality, which Americans are also recognizing, we're shifting into multipolarity. If you still have the unipolar mentality that you don't have to anymore recognize the security concerns of opponents, because we built in this mentality over the past 30 years, it's almost immoral to recognize, because you don't want to legitimize it, because we are a benign hegemon. Our dominance is good for the world. We're spreading liberal democracy. So taking into account security concerns of opponents means to legitimize what you shouldn't legitimize. So this is a very strange mentality. And why it's so dangerous now is it's not the unipolar distribution of power. So what happens if you don't take into account the security concerns of your opponents, the Russians, Chinese, Iranians? Well, you're going to then create conflicts where there wasn't necessary to be conflicts. You're going to encourage all these great powers to align together. And anyone who opposes this, again, we see that, well, they're referred to as a traitor. I make the point often, don't underestimate the Chinese, Russians, Iranians. If you do, we're going to pay a heavy price. And also, they do have legitimate concerns. There's no space in our discourse. You are actually the former defense minister of Norway in a debate. She said, well, more or less that, yeah, I hope that Ukraine will be destroyed and Europe will fall under threat of Russia. That because I'm a traitor, because I thought this is a very foolish policy we have towards NATO. So there's no space in our discourse to recognize that perhaps we have to change the entire mentality to a multipolar system. And it's always, you support this side or this side, Ukraine or Russia, Israel or Iran, and you're only allowed to support one side. So you end up with this very simplistic tribal policy. But no one asks at the end of the day, look at Ukraine, what happened? Exactly what many people said, they would be completely destroyed. Who can say that Israel is in a better position now than they were a few weeks ago before the attack on Iran? It was foolish. So it's not about supporting one or the other, it's about avoiding wars when it can be avoided. Same as Europe, deindustrialized, irrelevant, militarized, and even the United States, is reaching its end game. The empire is over, but yeah, as you say, we keep going straight off a cliff because no one wants to readjust to the new distribution of power, which means we're deeply irrational. And this is my big concern, at least. So anyways, we already got a bit
Just one point that I'd like to add to that. And I always say, I've been saying for years now, that there were two catastrophes that befell that visited the United States and the West in the last 30 years. One was the collapse of the Soviet Union, which I think was a catastrophe for the West. And the second was the defeat of Saddam Hussein, the very easy defeat of Saddam Hussein, the ridiculous defeat of Saddam Hussein in Kuwait. Because what happened in Kuwait did away with the ghost of Vietnam. And they were almost simultaneous, the fall of the Soviet Union. So you had the end of history, as Fukuyama claimed at that time. And even though Fukuyama's views changed, but in reality, if you look carefully, that end of history mentality continued even with him, and I think across the board in the West. And so that arrogance, I think, was really what brought brought down the Western Empire. You saw, first of all, at home, since there was no threat from the left anymore, they pushed neoliberal policies much further and much faster. And so the middle class gradually collapsed. And then, as you rightly pointed out, whenever they saw an adversary or a criticism or an opponent, they tried to destroy it. And then you had the endless wars of this century, which drained their resources rapidly. But because they still think that they're exceptional and it's end of history, and they are, destiny is, they are the destiny of humanity, and the future is theirs. They cannot think. They cannot see the foolishness of their policies and the murderous nature of their regime. So they have been going ever since they thought that they had reached the end of history. They've been going nowhere but down. And I think that people are beginning to see that in the West increasingly. And I think the decision by NATO yesterday is going to actually push this forward, because Glenn, and this is, I'm not a sociologist, uh, so I'm just putting this out there. But if you live and you're brought up in a country that's impoverished and it continues to be impoverished in the future, people will say, well, that's how it is. But if you live in societies where the older people remember life being much better and life is now much worse, and that I think is the case for the West, then that is going to create more resentment and more anger and more depression. And I think that will lead to instability, political instability. And of course, the different forces that emerge as a result. So the empire is going to face tougher days, and the fragmentation of the world, or the multipolarity, because multipolarity is not something that's going to happen simple. It's not going to be simple. It's going to be very messy and bloody, especially when the empire is drowning. Just like a drowning person, they say if you approach him from the front or and try to save them, they'll jump on you out of desperation, that you'll both drown. Uh, that's how the empire is right now. It's lashing out, and it's I think at its most dangerous phase. But I think increasingly the rest of the world is determined to protect itself, and so we'll have to see how things play out. But obviously, we're living in very dangerous and volatile times. But for now, the West is losing, and I think that the biggest loss for the West is that people no longer admire it. People look down at it. And in the West, young people don't admire it. They're looking down at it. And as we speak, this genocide in Gaza continues, and people see that as one example.
Yeah. No, well, again, one big strength of the West was always, open discourse in order to recognize these weaknesses, these flaws, so we could change course. But this is also going out
But
the window.
Glenn, and again, just adding to that, they speak about open discourse, but during these 2 weeks, CNN has never spoken with me. I don't know, Fox News has never spoken with me. Sky News, they contacted me twice. I spoke once. The second time I had another commitment. The BBC once or twice. That was it. And so they're waging a war against Iran, and they don't. Their discussion is among themselves, and that's how it's always been. Every now and then, every few months, they'd invite someone like me to give this alternative perspective from this crazy country of evil and so on, and then I'd be a mouthpiece, and I'd be close to the regime, and that's how I'd be presented. He's Mohammad Marandi, who is close to the regime or whatever. And then whoever else is there is a professor of so-and-so at Stanford or whatever at this think tank, prestigious. So I'd be on for like 5 minutes in the past. Now I'm not on at all. So it just shows that this openness is itself a facade. It's not real openness. If I want to learn something online, I go to your channel. I go to Judge Napolitano. I go to Danny's or Nima's, and or our other friends, the Gray Zone, or Sabrina, and so on. The people who are active and who bring on people like yourself, or the Duran, and I know there are others. I don't want to miss anyone, to exclude anyone. But the point is that you don't get information, so it's not really it's not open. The debate is not open. It's if you don't search for these alternative media, then you're not going to hear it. And alternative media is, of course, suppressed. It is demonetized. It is censored. I've been removed from Facebook years ago. I've been removed from Instagram years ago. I know that my Twitter account has been often shadow banned, and that's the true with others as well. So, you know, this facade of open debate is also being seriously challenged, because I think the best example is the Holocaust in Gaza itself. People are being massacred, but the Western media is still trying to look away or justify it or say, look at Iran, look how evil Iran is and all that. And young people see it. They know why TikTok has been treated the way in which it was. So, uh, things are changing. I'm not saying that it's going to get better anytime soon, make it worse, but things are changing.
No, I feel that too. So, well, I already taken too much of your time. So, yeah, Professor Marandi, as always, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain.
And it's always an honor, a pleasure, and thank you for providing me with this opportunity. And it's always great listening to your analyses.